All right. Tonight we are in Genesis chapter 7, verses 6 through 24, where we read, Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. It's the word of God. Let's pray. Gracious God, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for tonight, for a time to come together with my brothers and sisters, Lord, to dive into your word, to hear you speak. And Lord, I just pray that you would give us hearts and minds and ears open to your word, that we may know what it is you're revealing about yourself, Lord, about your wonderful plan of redemption for us, and about all of history to us, God. So just work in us by your Spirit, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So last week we spoke about how God, through his judgment of wicked mankind and his salvation of Noah and his family, was preparing to start over with a new creation. So God placed all of creation, the whole cosmic temple, symbolically into the ark to preserve life and give man everything he would need to live after the flood. Now this week we're going to talk about the flood itself, and we're going to see this new creation idea run throughout. Verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. So we're given Noah's age here, but I want us to notice a few things. First, we see here that Genesis doesn't offer a precise chronology of events. We were introduced to Noah back in chapter 5. Genesis 5:28, when Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we're given the age of Noah here, and it's 500. It's a nice round number. And we saw how this doesn't indicate that Noah had all 3 sons that year. It doesn't indicate that these sons were born after Noah turned 500. This is only telling us 3 sons that he had when he was 500. That after isn't even in the Hebrew here. Then to begin chapter 6, we have a second divine rebellion, which is when God declares he'll judge the earth, and he says, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. And we saw that what God was doing here was putting a time limit on his judgment. God is saying that 120 years after that rebellion, he was going to destroy mankind because of their wickedness. Then we get here in Genesis 7, where we read Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. Noah is now 600 years old. It's, again, a nice round number. There's the problem. If Noah was 500, then God to the earth had 120 years left, and Noah is now 600. The math just doesn't work. So either the beginning of Genesis 6 moves us back in time from the end of Genesis 5, or Moses may just be rounding Noah's age to the nearest 100 for a reason. And we're going to see the flood, the duration, and when the waters subside is only given timestamps based on Noah's age. So these nice round numbers help do that. The point is that, again, you cannot build a chronology based on the history in Genesis. Moses is not interested in giving us precise dates regarding anything that happens. So what is Moses trying to communicate here? Well, he's trying to communicate what the Apostle Peter points out. When he refers to the sin of the watchers, he points out they were in hell because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Peter points out how God was being patient. He waited to bring the flood waters on the earth until the 8 people he chose to start the new creation with were able to be saved from it. And this is a picture of God's patience with his elect, with those that he has chosen. And it's going to be important for Israel to know as they prepared to enter the promised land. Because think about it, if you're an Israelite, why the 400 years of slavery? Why another 40 years wandering the desert? Well, it's because God was patient until he can provide salvation for those he chose. Moses is telling that generation of Israelites that God chose them to inherit the promised land. And the same thing goes for us. Why has Jesus not returned to complete our salvation? Because along with that comes the final judgment. And as Peter points out in his second letter, do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. For the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. We have to remember who Peter's talking to here. He's talking to Christians. We can't take this out of context like so many people do and say, oh, Peter says God doesn't want anyone to perish. That's not what it says. This is talking about the elect. God is being patient so that none of the elect fail to reach repentance. And when we all do, then the end will come. If you're part of the Revelation study, we saw this theme recur a few times. Well, this patience is what's being pictured here. We have that 100-year gap in Noah's life. God is patient for the sake of Noah, who he chose. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. So these 8 people that will now begin the new creation go into the ark where they're going to be safe from God's judgment. And again, the ark is a type of Christ. Remember, the ark is a temple. Christ is the true temple. The ark is where man had to flee to escape God's wrath. Christ is where man truly has to flee to escape God's wrath. And then we also see God's provision as Moses reiterates what we've seen before. He says, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God had commanded Noah. Remember, God made sure that everything mankind would need for both sustenance and proper worship of God was provided for with these clean and unclean animals. And again, this 2 and 2 could be translated pairs and pairs. God commanded to Noah to take 7 pairs of clean animals and birds and 1 pair of unclean animals. So that's not contradictory with this 2. It doesn't really say 2. All it's saying is that Moses took pairs of animals into the ark. But I want us to again notice how chronology can't be Moses' point, because Moses is again making a theological point. Let's read this with the chronological markers Moses provides altogether. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. Here, Noah was 600. He and his family and all the animals get into the ark. And 7 days later, we're told the flood comes upon the earth. But then look what Moses says next. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps in the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God has commanded them. And the Lord shut him in. Now, if we don't read this very carefully, we can think Moses is just repeating himself here. Or maybe he's just filling in some finer details. In verse 6, he said Moses was 600 years old when the flood came. Here, we're told specifically Noah was 600 years, 1 month, and 17 days old. See, Moses is establishing now a precise day so the chronology of the flood can be kept in reference to Noah's age. And we're told again, Noah and his family and all the animals were brought into the ark, all according to God's command. But here we're told the flood began on the very same day Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. But 3 verses prior, we're told everyone got on the ark, and after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So is there a contradiction here? Well, only if Moses' purpose is to put a date on any of this, or to give us a precise chronology, but he's not. He's painting a picture for us using language from earlier in the book of Genesis. In verse 11, we read, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. He's bringing us back to the creation again here. Let's remember the ancient Israelite understanding of the universe. Remember the firmament we read about in Genesis 1? How it was believed that the land of earth was flat and there was a dome over it. Over the dome was water. Under the earth was water in the place of a dead. So the fountains of the great deep bursting forth is talking about the waters under the earth. Water that used to rise as a mist to provide for man. Now the waters rise from the place of death to destroy man. The windows of heaven are a picture of the waters above the firmament falling to earth. And remember, the firmament is above the sky and even outer space. Note the clouds and the heavenly bodies are beneath the dome of the firmament here. So the windows of heaven being opened isn't speaking of water from rain clouds. Moses describes this as water coming from heaven itself. And heaven, of course, is the place of God's dwelling. So Moses is using this to paint a picture of this being much more than just a natural occurrence. It was that. But this flood and the rain is coming directly and supernaturally from the hand of God. He shows that this rain is coming from heaven itself. And think about where the creation account began. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we saw in the creation account of Genesis 1, the focus is on God, who he is, who he's always been, what he's done, that he's the sovereign creator of all that is. Now Moses is pointing to God as the one who's doing this, who's destroying the creation. The focus is again on God. God is uncreating what he created. This is why Moses says, and after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. Moses is using his words to paint a picture. The creation account details 7 days in which God went from this, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, to this. And God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. God took 7 literal days to go from the waters of chaos to a very good creation at rest. Now God's going from a corrupted creation back to the chaos of the waters. And Moses uses this wordplay of 7 days to picture the reversal of the first 7 days. But the parallels to creation continue. Because Noah and his family, those of mankind that God will preserve, they get on the ark. And remember, mankind was the last thing created by God. But it's not just them in the ark. It was they and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind. Every winged creature, we see this according to the kinds that we see in the creation account. And we're brought back to creation where God created the livestock and the creeping things of the land according to their kinds on the 6th day. He created the birds according to their kinds on the 5th day. Moses is moving in reverse order from the creation account to detail what God is preserving on the ark. Again, creation is being undone. But there's more. We read in verse 15, they went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. So we have this breath of life language again. We talked about this back at the beginning of our study. All creatures are said to have the breath of life. That's not unique to man. We're unique because we have the image of God and no other creature does. But God gave the breath of life to these creatures in the beginning. Now he's preserving some of all flesh in which there was this breath of life. This is more creation talk. So is this. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. So we have another parallel. We once again see very clearly this is the work of God. He shuts them in the ark. He makes them safe from judgment. But Moses also talks about the fact that all the creatures in the ark were male and female. And the first time we see this talk of male and female is in the creation account when we read, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And what does God do immediately upon creating man, male and female? And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every green plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth. Everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food," and it was so. So God gives the creation mandate here, gives instructions about food for everything that has the breath of life. There we see that breath of life talk again. And in the construction of the ark and bringing the animals on board, Noah is actually carrying out the creation mandate. He is stewarding the creation. He's ruling over it as God's vice regent, because he was to bring every animal and enough food to feed them all. So all of this is imaging God's undoing of the creation, while at the same time continuing the creation through those that are on the ark so as to keep his promise of redemption. Because God could have wiped out everyone, including Noah, and started over with a new man and woman. But God made a promise that the offspring of Eve would be the one to undo sin and death. And Moses wants to make sure Israel and we understand that God is going to keep that promise. Even in the worst of times, God's promise of redemption is sure. And second, there's only and ever will be one people of God, one elect group of God's children that he will save. This is why Noah is of the line of spiritual faithfulness, and this is why he is being saved. That line must continue. And that would be important for that second generation of Israelites to know. Right? The entire previous generation had been wiped out. Everyone wiped out in the wilderness except for 2 men and their families. Relatively very few actually get to enter the promised land. And they are all the spiritual line of faithfulness. Joshua and Caleb were the only faithful men to God in that first generation, and only they of that first generation get to enter the promised land. And they are descended from Noah, both physically and spiritually, and from Seth, and from Adam. See, Moses is should have recorded his genealogy, so Israel going into the land, no, they are part of that unbroken line. And it's like God started over with a new generation of Israelites, except for a chosen few. Here in the flood, God is starting over with a few chosen people. And then God's going to return the earth to where it was at the beginning of creation. Where we read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And he does this by sending waters from the pit of hell and water from heaven, and he directly causes this flood as judgment. And rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. We read about this 40 days and 40 nights a lot in the Bible. But it's not meant to be taken literally. It's just, it's a Hebrew saying for a long period of time, usually something lasting more than a month. So we read of this, or things like Moses being on Mount Sinai 40 days and 40 nights, or Elijah fasting 40 days and 40 nights, or even Jesus fasting 40 days and 40 nights. It's not literal days. Even here, when this is repeated, the flood continued 40 days in the earth, the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. It's not meant to be taken literally. What we can take literally is the timestamp that Moses gives us. Because he says, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Realize when Moses wrote this, a month was 30 days long. Every month was 30 days long. So this would be 5 months. And we know in verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. And we'll see in chapter 8, the fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed, the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the water had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The whole ordeal from the first drop of rain to the stop of the rain was 5 months, 150 days. Verse 17, the flood continued 40 days in the earth, the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. So the rain came down, the oceans flooded up, and the ark rises high above the earth, we're told. And here's where we face a legitimate question. Was the flood a worldwide flood, or was it a local flood? You probably have an opinion on that, but is your opinion based on the biblical text? Because some will point here and say, well, the waters prevailed and increased on the earth, and the ark is to float high above the earth, so this must be a worldwide flood, because it covered the whole earth. The problem with that is that the word translated earth here is our Hebrew word eretz we've seen so many times. It's usually translated land. Like when we read of the rivers that flowed from Eden. The name of the first is Pishon is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon, and the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. So when we see land, it talks about specific places. Or when we read, Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. This is the same word here, used for land. It's the same word that's translated earth everywhere here in Genesis 7. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved on the earth. Birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. And you can see if we take this passage and translate the word land in each spot, we have a different picture of what happens. Now, we saw last week it's very possible man had not spread that far from Eden, right? Mankind pretty much stayed close to the land of Eden, and that's part of the reason God is judging them. They failed to carry out the creation mandate. So in order to kill all of mankind, the flood would have only had to have covered a small portion of the Middle East. And as we know already, many ancient cultures had stories about this devastating flood that destroys most of mankind. As we've talked about, many of these myths are based in truth, just twisted. In Greek mythology, Zeus sends a flood that destroys all of mankind except for two men, and the flood covers only the land of Hellas. Mesopotamia had a lot of legends about the flood, the most famous of which is contained in the Gilgamesh epic. In that story, the flood waters wipe out one city. Again, these myths are a twisting of the truth, so it doesn't prove anything, but that's interesting. All right, what about the fact that we're told the waters covered all the high mountains under the whole heaven? The water was 15 cubits above the tops of the mountains. That's 22 and a half feet. Now, this would mean this was a worldwide flood, but don't forget the imagery of the high mountain in the Bible. Throughout the Bible, it refers to where heaven and earth meet, like we saw with Mount Hermon, where the Garden of Eden likely was. And this idea of that which is under the whole heaven is often used metaphorical, like a lot of sayings in the Old Testament. Like when we read requirements in the law that are for all Israel, but they're really only for men. Or when we read that all Israel sinned against God, but it really was only a few. And that all the animals that moved on the earth died is not an issue. If we want to remember, this may just be referring to the land, only the land inhabited by sinful man. Plus, if this is the worldwide flood, we need to explain how animals got to the Americas, since we are connected by land to the other continents. And while yes, some people would tell you, well, you can walk from Russia to Alaska when the Bering Strait freezes, not many animals could survive walking thousands of miles in sub-zero temperatures to get here. And then how do you explain Australia and all the scary animals that live there? Point being, in the end, it doesn't really matter whether or not the flood was worldwide or local. What matters is that all of mankind, except for Noah and his family, were wiped out. Plus, remember how Israel would have understood the earth. They believed there was one landmass on earth, and it was flat. If the waters were above the tops of the mountains of the Middle East, then all of the land on earth would have been underwater. It doesn't mean it's actually what happened. The point is that Moses and they would see the world this way and believe this flood affected all of the land on earth as they understood it. And of course, to them, the world was much smaller than it actually is. Even by the time we get to the New Testament, it speaks of bringing the gospel to all nations. It's only talking about the nations known at that time. But it is important that the flood covers the top of the high mountains, because a disaster such as this would change the topology of the land that was included in the flood. Because a lot of critics look at the description in the creation account and say, well, we don't know where the land of Eden was, we don't know where the garden was, we don't know any of this is describing, so this must be fiction. Like the rivers we just talked about. Remember what we saw in Genesis 2? That a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is the Pishon. It's the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. This describes 4 rivers with a common source in Eden that comes to the garden and splits into 4 rivers of the garden. Now we still know where the Tigris is. It does flow east of where Assyria was. We know where the Euphrates River is. It is very close to the Tigris, but they don't have a common source. In addition, the other 2 rivers mentioned in Genesis 2, no one knows where they are. So the account in Genesis 2 is clearly a work of fiction to many. Unless there was a world-altering event that might change the flow of rivers. like a sudden flood where the oceans overflowed and rain fell at such a rate that waters reached over 9,000 feet above sea level in only 5 months. But why would this be significant anyway? Well, if man was failing in the creation mandate and staying close to Eden, and if the heart of man was such that we always want our own way back to God, like we'll see again with the Tower of Babel, and if the original topology of the land was such that any one of these 4 rivers could be followed back to their source and you wind up in the garden, what might God want to do to encourage Noah and his offspring to not stay close to the garden and spread across the earth? God might want to make finding the garden impossible, like maybe doing away with some of those rivers, getting rid of the common source of the 2 rivers we know of, maybe even changing the topology of the mountains in the Middle East. Why would God do this? Well, God was undoing the original creation. Man couldn't get to God anymore because of sin. So having the garden in the land of Eden really served no purpose. The flood is the result of man's separation from God. So the physical removal of the place of God's former presence on earth is representative of the state of mankind. And remember, we saw how Moses paints this picture of God taking the entire cosmic temple, the whole creation, and putting it in the ark. The threefold division of the Garden of Eden and the earth was no longer necessary. We have the 3 levels of the ark representing the temple and the creation. And that's why we get all these parallels to the original creation being on the ark. That's why we read the waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. We've seen something about the face of the waters before. Back in Genesis 1:2, we read the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. These are the only 2 places in the entire Old Testament that this Hebrew construction is used. Every other place you might read of something being on the face of the waters, happens in Job, it happens in Hosea, the definite article is missing from waters. It should really be translated in those places on the face of waters. But in these 2 verses, and only these, are we told about the waters. What waters? They are the waters of chaos that lead to creation. So this is a new creation beginning, with everything mankind needs in the floating temple on the waters from which God will recreate. Because everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. You know, on the 3rd day of creation, we read, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. With the flood, Moses is telling us this is undone. The dry land now disappears, and everything on the land dies. He, meaning God, blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground. Man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Again, Moses reverses the order of creation. Man, animals, birds, and tells us they were destroyed except for what God placed on the ark. Creation was undone, and what was left, everything that was left of the original creation, was on the ark. And Noah and his family and all the animals were on the ark for those 5 months. So there are 3 takeaways from this account. Like I said, number 1, we see God keeps his promises. By keeping Noah alive, he's keeping his promise that he made back in the garden. Number 2, we see that God saves and provides for his elect. But number 3, we see that God punishes sin. Again, we're told of this story when we're kids, and it's a funny little story about animals, but this is the destruction of the creation of all mankind. And Israel would need to know these things. They had to have faith and believe that God would keep his promises and believe that God would save and provide for his elect if they were going to avoid the punishment for sin. And the same is true for all men at all times. And next week we'll see what happens when the flood subsides.